stream in a row. We went Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and now Monday. And we are going to be bringing you some friendly neighborhood history for the next hour, talking about the history and the traditions of the Yuletide season of Christmas. Basically, this will be compiled later on into a video that I will be doing about the history of Christmas and its very famous traditions. I will be discussing what people celebrate and why people have certain Christmas celebrations, where these traditions came from, how we get things like Yule logs, and how we get things like Christmas trees and reefs and things like that, and where these things come from, and why people celebrate Christmas on December 25th, how it's not really possible that Jesus of Nazareth, who is celebrated, his birth is celebrated on Christmas, was probably not born on December 25th, but of course the holiday is centered around him and everything. And yes, I am wearing my Grinch Santa hat, so get comfortable, grab some hot cocoa, and join me for the next hour or so as I discuss the history of this wonderful holiday. But if you like learning about friendly neighborhood history, if you like what this channel does, please be sure to like and subscribe, follow the channel along. We are trying to hit 6,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We may not get there, but we really love all the support that you guys can give us, and especially around this time of the year and everything. So look forward to my video about the history of Christmas that will be dropping on Christmas Eve, along with the history of Hanukkah, which will also be dropping on Christmas Eve, because Hanukkah starts Christmas night at sundown when Jewish days begin. That is the first evening of Hanukkah. So and that, of course, is celebrated for 8-9, right, celebrating the Jewish victory over their Greek oppressors in the 2nd century BC. And I'll be going into the full history of the Maccabean revolt and that whole thing for that video there. But I will also be talking about, in my other video, the history and the important traditions of Christmas and why Christmas is celebrated and how it is celebrated, from 'Twas the Night Before Christmas to Old St. Nicholas to all of these things. I'll be discussing that in that video, but also here in the live stream. And Merry Christmas. Great to see you all in the chat. And we have a wonderful live stream for you today. And if you enjoy these live streams, consider liking and subscribing. Come back next Friday and Saturday. I will be doing my usual Q&A, followed by Sunday, where I will be discussing another topic for a live stream lecture. So we did an extra bonus live stream lecture for you guys this week. We made up last week's live stream lecture when I was sick with the flu and talked about the Roman Republic yesterday. That was really enjoyable. But today, it's all about Christmas. It's all about the Yuletide season and the celebrations around there. So even if you don't celebrate Christmas, you might learn some really interesting history about why Christmas is celebrated and how it's been celebrated. And the first thing I want to say about Christmas and how it is celebrated is that Christmas was not originally, and a Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to all of you guys. And yes, and you're still waiting for that to be released. So thank you for joining us, and Merry Christmas to you all. Happy holidays. Hope you are enjoying the Yuletide season and everything. But let me start off with this fact. Did you know that Christmas was not originally celebrated on December the 25th, nor was it originally a celebration of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth by the Christians? Christmas, at least the origins of a winter holiday celebrated around December 25th, date back far beyond that to ancient pagan and Roman times. The most famous of these examples are the Feast of Saturnalia, celebrated by the Romans, who would celebrate the end of the year and their harvest with lots of wine drinking and carousing and all sorts of parties and things like that, and celebrate Saturnalia, who was the god of agriculture who had brought them through another year. The end of the year was when a lot of alcohol would also thoroughly ferment, so there would be tons of wine and beer available for the Romans and for the German pagans, who would often celebrate a winter solstice, celebrating different gods in their religion, such as Norse mythology and Odin, who would be celebrated. And usually these festivals would start on December 21st, the winter solstice, or right before the winter solstice, and they would go for several weeks onward. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that the celebration of Christmas is not, which has been limited to one day by consumer culture, actually, in its original intent, was to be celebrated for 12 days. This is why we have that song, The 12 Days of Christmas. Starting on Christmas Eve and going to January 6th, which is supposed to be Epiphany, which I'll discuss in a second, Christmas is a celebration that lasts for a couple of weeks. But so were the ancient festivals to Saturnalia and to Odin. The German pagans and the Scandinavians would celebrate Odin and their different pagan gods around this time of the year for bringing them through another year. They would celebrate the return of the sun, despite the fact that the sun wasn't in the sky nearly as much. And they would usually, that was the time of year when their calves were fattened enough that they would kill and eat them. So they would have these huge feasts with a lot of meat available. Again, their wine and their beer would be fermented, so they would be able to use that. And so there was a great time for partying and carousing and eating and drinking and making a lot of merry. In Scandinavia, the season became known as Yule, Ule, and usually men would bring back Yule logs, giant wooden logs that would be put on a bonfire and lit. And as long as the Yule log was burning, they were celebrating. And the Yule log would sometimes burn for weeks at a time. So that is why we call it the Yuletide season. So there's a little bit of a history of Christmas before we get to the Christian celebration of it. This is the before Christ, the BC era of Christmas, or at least a winter celebration. So the Romans would celebrate Saturnalia, and they would also celebrate the god Mithra, who was the god of the sun. And Mithra would be one of the most respected and powerful gods in their society. And Mithra supposedly also was born of a virgin and born on December 25th when he emerged from a rock, interestingly enough. So we've got so there were celebrations to different Roman gods who they enjoyed celebrating with different parties and festivals and all sorts of things, be they Saturnalia, be they Mithra. And the pagans, the Germans, the Alemanni and the Teutoni tribes that were often at war with the Romans would also be celebrating this time of year. And they would be celebrating the god Odin, who they feared would go at the end of the year and judge them and decide who would be destroyed for being evil and who would prosper for being good. So the notion of naughty and nice actually dates back to the ancient Germanic tribes who were worried about how Odin, who was the god of the sky, would punish them. So there's an interesting factoid there. So and a lot of the times these German groups would use trees and would celebrate their festivals and have bonfires around trees. And evergreens were their most popular trees because the evergreen never died. The evergreen would later be appropriated by German Lutherans into being the Christmas tree, the Tannenbaum that we know and love today. But basically, the Christmas tree, the celebrations of a long-time festival, the celebration of a birth of a god, these were extraordinarily common and popular before the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. And so there was a pagan celebration. There were different types of pagan celebrations common for these people at this time. That is what that was very common. And yes, these people were, some of them were avid takers of hallucinogenics and other sorts of roots and plants and drugs that would put them in altered states of consciousness. So there were celebrations, there were parties, there were orgies, there was carousing and cavorting all over the place, because this was the time when your meat was fat, your wine was ready to drink, and you were happy to have made it through the year, and you wanted to make it through the winter, and you wanted to curry the favor of the gods and make sure that you had been nice and not naughty. So that was basically those were common practices hundreds of years even before the birth of Jesus, and were common with the Romans at the time of the birth of Jesus. Of sorry, I'm blanking out. Was common for the birth be around the time of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. So, in all likelihood, shifting towards that part of the story, Jesus of Nazareth was not born on December 25th. You had shepherds tending their flocks in Israel. They probably weren't doing that in the winter. It is most likely that Jesus would have been born sometime in the late summer or early fall, based on what you can tell. You had wise men coming from the east, following different astrological signs, supposedly according to the story. So there's no, so we don't actually know when Jesus of Nazareth was born. It was never it is never said in any of the gospel narratives, nor in the early church was there any celebration of Jesus's birth or acknowledgement of it coming on December 25th. The celebration of Jesus's birth became a practice in Christian communities later on in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries in North Africa and Europe, and they did a lot there to celebrate his birth. Usually equalizing, doing their own form of the ancient pagan rituals and celebrations and festivals. They would have different parties that would last almost like a Mardi Gras thing for days on end, celebrating the birth of Christ. And December the 25th eventually became the day they settled on. There is evidence of these celebrations starting in Egypt in the 5th century, and by the 6th century, the English were even practicing it. So it spread around. The old Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, and the Eastern Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire had already fallen at this point, or was falling, and the Eastern Roman Empire would become known as the Byzantine Empire, was still a bastion of Christian practice. So as Christianity spread throughout Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and North Africa, and these areas, the practice of celebrating Jesus' birth as a way to replace ancient pagan customs became more and more common. during the 5th century and 6th centuries AD. But the original Christians did not celebrate the birth of Christ. The celebration was his death and resurrection, supposedly, with the Easter holiday. So Easter had always been the most important holiday in the Christian calendar. Christmas would catch up later on in popularity and appeal. But the medieval church basically sanctioned all sorts of rituals and practices and holidays, and different areas did different things, and they took their ancient practices of celebrating Norse gods or pagan deities or Roman deities and reapplied it to the celebration of Jesus of Nazareth. So basically, the Catholic Church in Western Europe used Christmas as a way to supplant the old holidays and customs by saying you can practice these things, but they're going to be about Jesus of Nazareth now. Now they're not going to be about Saturnalia or Odin or Mithra or any of these mythical figures who don't exist. It's actually about God, our God, Jesus. So that was a common form of religious imperialism that allowed the Catholicism to to take the practices of the local areas and reinterpret them in a Christian lens, which made Christianity more palpable for the local groups of people who were oftentimes very hesitant to abandon old polytheistic religious systems like Norse mythology for Christianity. But this made it more palpable for them. And by the 11th century, most of all of Europe had been Christianized, and Christmas was one of the ways in which there was a transition into this Christian world for these people, where they were no longer celebrating the gods of old, but were celebrating the birth of Jesus of Nazareth and the beginning of his life. And it's around this time that some of the earliest Christmas carols get written. For instance, O Come Emmanuel, which is one everyone is very familiar with, very, very beautiful, is a Latin-based church text written in the 12th century. Monks of different religious orders would oftentimes write Christmas carols. The celebration of Christmas was more like festivals and parties, and it became more and more common for Christians to celebrate Christmas based on the approval and the sanction of the Catholic Church. But this wasn't something that the early Christians had done. And certainly a part of that might be the fact that during the first few centuries of Christianity, they were heavily persecuted by the Roman Empire. And as the Christianity continued to be persecuted, it somehow paradoxically continued to grow. As it grew, it outpaced the birth rate of pagan Romans, so that by the early 4th century, when Constantine becomes the emperor, Christianity is the fastest growing religion and has the most influence. And Constantine is able to legitimize and legalize Christianity, making it a safe religion that would no longer be persecuted. And after that, the church is able to grow its influence. And by 380, Christianity is the official religion of the Roman Empire under a man named Theodosius the Great. And Theodosius makes Christianity the official religion, and therefore the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, whichever one you want to consider it, to be the main church. Both of these churches individually, one in the East and one in the West, are going to be able to extend their influence and prominence over Europe and over the peoples in their regions, and be able to countermand their festivals and pagan holidays with Christian practices. So as different saints like Boniface and Patrick go to places like Scandinavia and England and Ireland and overthrow these old pagan practices and rituals, they replace them with Christian practices and rituals, allowing them to continue their celebration, but only through the embracing of Jesus Christ. And so that is why Christmas is based in December. It's based on Yule. It's based on the celebrations to Odin. It's based on the celebration of Saturnalia and these winter festivals. But it is not an acknowledgement by the church that Jesus is Mithra or Saturnalia or Odin. Only that you can still have these practices, but you must embrace the Christian God in order to do them. And it's not their birthday; it's his birthday. So. One of my favorite ugly Christmas sweaters, by the way, which has become a popular tradition in American culture in recent years, is the one with Jesus, and it says, "We're going to party like it's my birthday." Just a fun aside there. So anyways, now how do we get from all of that to the modern Christmas that we all know and love and celebrate, or at least most of us do? Well, part of that comes from the fact that the growth of Christian influence leads to the growth of Christian traditions. And like I mentioned, some of those saints are extremely important for understanding the conversion of different areas. Um, uh, And because of that happening, uh, there is more and more traditions that become more and more popular, and Christian saints and bishops and leaders are going to help have a huge influence on the celebration and practice of these holidays and of these festivals. In medieval Europe, people worked every day except Sunday, but they would also have holidays off. So, despite the fact that their work was for very low wages, it was backbreaking, and they were often serfs tied to the land that they had to work on for a particular liege lord or master or duke or count or earl or baron or nobleman. They would oftentimes have plenty of time off given by the church. There would be the festival of St. Christopher or the festival of the Virgin of the birth of Mary or something like that. And so, because you would have all of these festivals, you would have a lot of time off from work. Christmas just became one of these festivals. And like I said, originally it was celebrated for several different days during a Mardi Gras like cavorting party and orgy. Basically, once again, the utilization of all the fermented alcohol and the fattened calves and all of these things allowed people to eat lots of food and drink lots of alcohol and celebrate the birth of their god. And so that became common. But like I said, many of the important figures in Christianity at this time were bishops and leaders who were later known as saints, who helped to spread the influence of Christianity and the practices around Christmas and other holidays. And one of the best examples of this is St. Nicholas of Myra. St. Nicholas of Myra was born in about 280 AD. He was born in Turkey, but he moved to Greece, so he's a Greco-Turkish Christian bishop and leader in the early days of the church. And he actually comes of age and becomes a formidable leader in the Christian church at the same time as what I just described. Uh, when Constantine legitimizes the Christian church and legalizes it and ends the persecutions in 312 with the Edict of Milan, uh, Nicholas is one of the rising figures in the Christian church, and it's at its center. Greece is considered the center of the church in many ways because most of the leaders of the church speak Greek, and the Old New Testament was written in Greek. Jesus's apostles all preached for the most part in Greek and Hebrew. So Israel, Greece, and Rome are these huge epicenters of Christian thought and activity. You have the Bishop of Rome, which will evolve into the papacy. That's an extremely important position. And at this time, the land of Israel, including ancient cities like Jerusalem, Damascus, and Antioch, are all controlled by the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and so they are all part of the Christian uh, sphere of influence. And Simon, so great to see you. My wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny, is here. Show him some love. He does a great job. And again, he's got the social media handles there, and he's plugging the channel. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy what you're learning about Christmas and the Yuletide season. So when Constantine legalizes Christianity, he legalizes the practice, and all of a sudden Christianity goes from being kind of a growing undertied thing that was constantly being attacked and persecuted and reviled to being the latest fad. And now everybody who can be a Christian wants to become a Christian. A lot of fakers and pretenders are there, but the Christian bishops and leaders are all of a sudden able to practice their faith in public ways that they hadn't been able to do so before. And Nicholas of Myra is one of these men who does this. Nicholas is very obsessed with the taking care of the poor and the needy. He would often try to make baskets and give away things for them during the holiday season, during the winter when it was difficult for them, when they were struggling with the cold and things like this. But he also did a very excellent job of creating. He had a particular love for children, and he would make toys for the children, and out of wood usually, because that was the material they used, and give them away at the holiday season. And so he was a toy maker who gave away toys, especially to the poor. And legend has it that he would walk up and down the streets, and he would throw coins or goods or food into people's houses, into stockings or shoes that were open in their windows. So the tradition of putting something in your stocking comes from St. Nicholas himself, who would supposedly do this for the poor people that he would walk down the streets near their houses and things like this. So this is an interesting. So the etiology, the story of us hanging up stockings and having them filled by St. Nicholas, literally comes from St. Nicholas of Myra filling up stockings in the early 4th century AD. Interestingly enough, a nice aside about St. Nicholas of Myra, The Christian church had a whole controversy in the early 300s about the divinity of Christ because of a man named Arius who did not believe that Jesus, according to Christian theology and according to the New Testament, was actually God, like many Christians had believed, but was actually a created being who was not fully equal to God, who was elevated to a high status by God the Father, and because of that, there were a group of Christians called Arians who believed that Jesus was not fully divine, and they became the controversial alternative, and they were growing in popularity in the early 300s. And Constantine called together a church council to stop them. It's called the Council of Nicaea, and there they agreed to that Jesus was God, just like God the Father was God. It's confusing Trinitarian Christian language, but the whole point is that St. Nicholas of Myra was present, and when listening to Arius talk about how Jesus was not God, he got so angry that he actually went up and punched him. So there is a story about St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, punching a guy out because he denied the divinity of Jesus of Nazareth. And it's actually a real story and really, really interesting. So that's a nice little aside. But Nicholas spent most of his life taking care of the poor, making toys for children, and throwing food and goods and gifts into stockings that he would see in open windows in people's houses. And that's where we get the tradition of St. Nicholas and the stocking stuffers and all of that great stuff that you hear about at Christmas all the time. So what happens next? So over the centuries, these traditions from the old world are going to make their way slowly but surely to a place where you have a large number of Europeans gathering and living together, and that's going to be the United States. One thing to note, by the way, about St. Nicholas of Myra, who is going to appear again in the story, St. Nicholas of Myra is actually also, his name is commandeered, and it's by the Dutch, and the Dutch called him Sinterklaas. The Russians called him Kris Kringle, and eventually the Anglicization of Santa Claus is Santa Claus. So Santa Claus is actually another way of saying Saint Nick based on the Dutch interpretation of that name. So these are some fast facts about Christmas and the holidays. And if you're enjoying this, be sure to like and subscribe and join the Friendly Neighborhood Historians. Join our growing number. We are trying to get to a legion, 6,000 by the end of the year. We'll see if we can do it. But yes, so Santa Claus, which is what the Dutch called him, or the French called him Papa Noel. And of course, Noel is the term for Christmas. We get the first Noel, the famous Christmas carol, from that. So just some interesting stuff there about the philology of the name Santa Claus that we use today. So when you say Santa Claus, you are referring to St. Nicholas. And the legends around St. Nicholas of Myra continue to grow even after his death. And the idea is based on the book of Revelation at the end of the Bible that Jesus would judge the entire world at the end of time. But every year, much like Odin would go and judge the ancient pagan people, and you can see how these pagan traditions were then incorporated into the Christian practice, that at the end of every year, Jesus would employ Saint Nicholas because of his pure heart and love for the poor and steadfast loyalty to Christian doctrine. He would employ him after his death to go and check on the world and see who was good and who was bad. So the idea of a naughty and nice list actually comes from Jesus supposedly in heaven employing St. Nicholas, also in heaven, to go down to earth and check on the status of humanity. And so that is where we get the he's making a list and checking it twice, going to find out who's naughty or nice. It's actually based on an ancient Christian legend surrounding Nicholas of Myra after his death. So these practices and traditions become extraordinarily popular throughout most of Europe, and the Catholic Church kind of regulates and monitors them, the different celebrations. Another popular practice is the employment of wreaths and Christmas trees. And they hadn't really been associated with Christmas. They had been associated with some pagan practices, especially in Germany. But it wasn't until the Protestant Reformation of the 1500s that they become popular Christmas symbols. So Martin Luther, the German reformer, in 1517, puts the 95 Theses on the church door at Wittenberg in Germany, protesting the sale of indulgences for salvation that the Catholic Church was doing at that time. and he starts the Protestant Reformation unintentionally. And as time goes on, more and more people follow Luther and the followers of Martin Luther, who become convinced that the church is not the final authority, that the Bible is the only authority for Christianity, and that Christianity should not be run by bishops and priests and popes, but by the word of God. These people become known as Lutherans. They are the followers of Martin Luther, and they become the first major Protestant denomination. And as time goes on, they're splintered off, and other groups come up like Calvinists and Anabaptists and Methodists and all of the different churches you can see if you drive down the street, if you drive through your town. So basically, Luther creates a whole bevy of new traditions in Christianity with his creation of the Protestant religion. And in doing this, he incorporates several ancient German practices and gives them a Christian spin, just like the Catholic Church had done with the celebrations of these winter festivals to Saturnalia and Mithra, accommodating them to Jesus. Luther does the same thing with the Christmas tree. Although this had been an ancient symbol, just like the Yule log in Scandinavia, of celebrating the survival through the year and enjoying these pagan festivals that were obviously not Christian by any stretch of the imagination, Luther reappropriates the Christmas tree and basically decides to use the evergreen as a symbol of Jesus living forever, because evergreens are supposed to never die. And because evergreens never die, the pine tree never dies, and is always green and always alive. So is Jesus, supposedly, now that he has risen from the dead. So that's the first thing. He also had the habit of taking candles, and this is totally a fire safety violation, but if you've seen it, we now use electric lights, but they used to put candles in holders on Christmas trees. And so if you ever see an old movie or a painting from the 19th century, you will find Christmas trees with candles on them. And that's extraordinarily common. And so Luther actually is the one who took the tradition of putting Christmas candles on Christmas trees so that they could represent Christian practices. In particular, the light, Jesus being the light of the world. And this is why a common Christian tradition in Protestant Christianity ever since then is that every light on the Christmas tree, be it electric or candle, represents Jesus because he's the light of the world. This is all Christianese interpretation and language and scriptural, especially New Testament references to Jesus of Nazareth and his importance being applied to Christmas symbols. So you have the evergreen that never dies. You have lights on the tree. And so the habit of putting a tree in your house and putting lights on it became popular with Luther and his followers, and they became the predominant religion in Germany. So the Germans were the ones to celebrate the Christmas tree, which they called the Tannenbaum. Eventually, in the 19th century, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, the husband of Queen Victoria, brings this Christmas tradition with him to England, and they put up a Christmas tree in Windsor Castle. And eventually, Elizabeth and him are going to become such an in vogue, popular couple that anything they do, anything this Queen Victoria does, is the most powerful woman in the world at the time, becomes widespread throughout her colonies and throughout the Western world, throughout Europe, and even makes its way to Africa and India and anywhere where the British have colonies set up. And so it becomes more in vogue in Britain in the 19th century, England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, and eventually goes to the United States of putting up a tree with candles lit on it in your house every year to celebrate Christmas. So the Christmas tree becomes popular in the Angloid world, Canada, the United States, and Great Britain, and the UK and Ireland in the 19th century, thanks to Victoria and her husband Albert bringing the Christmas tree over from his native Germany, where they had been doing this practice for hundreds of years. So those are European practices and traditions and customs surrounding Christmas. Once again, something to go back to is everybody thinks Christmas is only celebrated on one day, and some people celebrated Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Technically, according to the church and the way Christmas was set up as a holiday in Europe, the church Christmas lasts 12 days. This is why we have that song on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me, on the second day of Christmas, and so on and so forth. So basically, the Christmas tree, or sorry, the church did two things. It set up a season of getting ready for Christmas known as Advent, which is the first 4 weeks of December, and that is celebrated by Catholics and Orthodox and many Protestant denominations in Christianity. More evangelical Protestants don't typically celebrate it as observantly, but with Advent, you light you light candles, and there are 4 candles, 3 purple ones and 1 pink one, and you light them until the last weekend before Christmas. And then there is a white candle you put in the middle, and on a Christmas service like a midnight mass, you will light that candle to celebrate the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. So the Advent season is the beginning of a new Christian year in the Christian calendar in Catholicism and Lutheranism and Anglicanism and many of the mainline Protestant denominations. Um, at the same time, those practices. So that you have the Advent season, and so from that you eventually get Advent calendars where you put it in a chocolate and you find it on the on a particular day, and you eat the chocolate based on which day of December it is, and it goes from December 1st to December 24th when Jesus is technically born. By the way, I haven't talked about the story in the actual gospel narrative, and I'll just do that right now briefly. But basically, according to the Gospels, which are biographies of Jesus of Nazareth, his mother Mary was betrothed to a man named Joseph, but it turned out she was pregnant before they got married. And supposedly this was because she was visited by an angel who told her that the Holy Spirit would give her a child without her getting married, and this child would be the King of the Jews and the King of the world and the Lord of all creation. And this is obviously the story that we all know and love. And Joseph finds out about this, but refuses to divorce her. She visits her cousin, who is also elderly and pregnant with John the Baptist, who will be the messenger for Jesus later on, about 30 years from now. And Mary and Joseph eventually, because there is a census that is requiring them to pay taxes, um, they basically allow this forces Mary and Joseph to go to this town of Bethlehem, little town of Bethlehem, and they make the journey, and it's there that she gives birth supposedly in the manger where animals stay and eat because there was no room for them in one of the local taverns, and she gives birth to Jesus. And supposedly there are shepherds around who are appeared to by angels who tell them to go and celebrate the birth of this new king. So you have shepherds, the lowliest people in society, visiting a manger, one of the dirtiest places in society, to celebrate the birth of a new king, a little baby born of a woman who is not married. And so there's all of these juxtaposition and role reversals in that narrative. And meanwhile, the last part of a novel, or story, I should say, is you have the appearance of the 3 wise men. Now, this is where the 12 days of Christmas come from. There is supposedly the 12 days between the birth of Jesus and the appearance of the wise men, which is known as Epiphany, or or not Epiphany. I think it's, yeah, or no. It is the 12 days, but until the revealing of Jesus and the appearance of the 3 wise men. Now, there are usually only 3 wise men because, according to the Bible in the book of Matthew, magi, who were wise rulers, nobles from the east, most likely the Persian Empire, saw astrological signs, supposedly saw a star in the sky, a star shining in the night, and they brought to Jesus, this baby, gifts of frankincense, myrrh, and gold. And because there's 3 gifts, there are usually 3 kings associated with we 3 kings of Orient or. Uh, yeah. The point I'm trying. So, anyways, now I'm not saying all of these things happened exactly as I said. This is the accounts given in the gospel narratives about the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, and this is what is celebrated at every Christmas. This is what many of the Christmas carols are about. O little town of Bethlehem, the first Noel, hark the herald angel sings. It came upon a midnight clear. All of these beautiful songs find their basis and are written usually between the 15th and the 19th century about the birth of Jesus. So, and the story ends this way. The Magi go and they visit Jesus, and they're warned in a dream not to return to the king of the local lands, who was known as Herod. Herod was put up by the Romans to basically rule over Judea. As long as he kept things in line, he would be able to retain his throne. And when they eventually escape and don't go back to Herod, they had gone to him and asked him where this new king was, and Herod, supposedly very jealous and worried, wanted to know where this king was so that he could go and worship him. He wanted them to go back and tell him. They refused to go back and tell him, and so because of that, Herod becomes furious, and he supposedly sends out his army and kills every young man that he can find, every boy, every baby boy in the town of Bethlehem. Before this happens, supposedly according to the book of Matthew, Jesus' father Joseph has an angel appear to him in a dream and tells him to take the child to Egypt. So they flee into Egypt, and that is where Jesus is raised for the next 6 or 7 years, not 12 years of his life. So, anyways, that is the story that is celebrated: the Magi, the gifts, the angels, the shepherds, the birth of Jesus, the Virgin Mary. All of these things uh, are celebrated at the Christmas season, and that is what the Christians are specifically celebrating, Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox. So, anyways, um, um, anyways, moving forward. So that was what was celebrated for years at a time in the Christian church, and became more and more popular after Christianity was legalized by the Romans and seemed more like a legitimized religion. Um, and because of that, they were able to start practicing and celebrating the birth of Jesus, and using that as a way to spread Christianity even more and overturn the ancient pagan customs of different areas with this renewed Christian celebration of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Um, so, anyways, getting back to Christmas and its history and its traditions. Um, so as the centuries go by, eventually the United States is going to make its contributions to the Christmas narrative, mainly because of the large amount of immigrants from all over the world who come to the United States and share their traditions of Christmas, particularly from Europe, in its history. And the first example of this is obviously the Dutch. In the 1600s, the Dutch actually populated the city of New York. They called it New Amsterdam. They settled on the island and named the island after the people who lived there, the Manhattan Indian tribe. And the Dutch, thanks to an English explorer, Henry Hudson, are able to set up a settlement in what is now New York, that they call New Amsterdam, that the English are eventually able to take away from them. But there is a continual presence of Dutch Christians in America for centuries to come, and they are the first ones to celebrate Santa Claus and the tradition of St. Nicholas bringing gifts and toys, and that is where Santa Claus starts off in America. This is in the mid to late 1700s, soon after as America is becoming a country and gaining its independence from the British. The celebration of Christmas is actually banned in colonial America and in England for a while because of a group of people called the Pilgrims or the Separatists. The Puritans, they are Calvinists who are very against the celebration of Christmas because they believe it is not in the Bible. And since it is not in the Bible, it is not a legitimate Christian celebration. It is a Catholic celebration, and therefore it is evil. And so for decades in Boston and in other areas of the United States, people did not celebrate Christmas. They did not dance. This was also true in Switzerland and Geneva under the leadership of John Calvin, who basically founded all of these different types of Christians that I just mentioned: the Puritans, the Pilgrims, the Presbyterians. Most of these groups did not, and some of them still to this day do not celebrate Christmas because they believed it was a pagan holiday that didn't have any origins in Scripture, and therefore there was no reason to enjoy or celebrate it. So Christmas was actually banned in England in the 1640s and 50s under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell after the English got rid of their king in their civil war, and Parliament ran the day for about 10 years. Cromwell basically banned the celebration of Christmas, and this also spread to the American colonies. So for a long time, there was no Christmas in the American colonies. However, the first drinking of eggnog actually happened with Captain John Smith. Yes, that guy from Pocahontas at Jamestown in 1607. So at the earliest days of America, there was eggnog in America. So, but what was I going to say? So anyways, so you have the emergence of Christmas in the colonies, and basically after Parliament brings back the king, and after Parliament brings back the English king in the early 1660s, and after the king regains control of his colonies in America, basically from here on out, Christmas will always be celebrated in some way, shape, or form in the American colonies as well as in England. And again, the traditions that are brought over by European immigrants over the next few centuries are going to continue to have a huge impact on the formation of Christmas in American culture. So you have the Dutch celebrating Santa Claus and the tradition of St. Nicholas all throughout their time here. Um, so there's that. At the same time, um, as the years go on, early in American history, there seems to be a need for celebrating a national culture and national creating a national culture that we could call Americana here in the United States, and that becomes especially the case and that becomes the that becomes, excuse me, my phone's ringing. Okay, sorry about that. Anyways, I don't like the background noise, but basically, you have something that is integral to American history is different immigrant groups from different parts of the world coming and contributing their culture. So the contribution of Dutch immigrants leads to Santa Claus being celebrated in America. The English immigrants bring along their special drink of choice for the holiday season, eggnog with Captain John Smith. There's a lot of this going on in the different colonies at these different times. And early in American history, there is this demand for the development of an American culture that screams Americanism, what we call Americana. So, uh, for instance, one of these examples is Washington Irving, who writes several short stories about the celebration of Christmas between the rich and the poor in the 1820s, basically idealizing Christmas as a time when the poor and the rich and people of all different classes and all different backgrounds, of all different professions and occupations, get together and enjoy the birth of Jesus, but also have a Yule log, enjoy a giant feast together, and basically swap gifts and enjoy one another's presence. So this was actually so um, in early American history, there was a need for the development of a culture, and part of the celebration of that culture included Christmas. And so Washington Irving, an American writer, idealized Christmas as a time for coming together, where the rich would pay back their debts to the poor, where the poor would have an opportunity to eat good food and be merry and enjoy the holiday. So this is actually before we get the tradition of the Christmas Carol. So Charles Dickens puts Christmas on the map in a way in England that it hadn't been before, with his writing of the Christmas Carol in 1843, which shows the salvation and reclamation of Ebenezer Scrooge, this old miserly businessman who basically through the visitation of three spirits and gains a level of compunction and understanding that he didn't have before, and decides to come back and stop and be generous, and to embrace Christmas as a means of being a kind and good-hearted person. And so that becomes extraordinarily popular in a industrialized England that is slowly showing a huge gap between the very rich and the very poor, showing the duty of the rich to take care and help the poor, the duty of the poor to the need for the poor to be helped and assisted whenever they need it, and also the importance of celebrating Christmas and embracing it as a time of cheer and good feeling and spirit towards one another, a time of generosity and charity, not a time of accumulating wealth and power. And so basically, Christmas became much more popular thanks to Dickens' writing in the 1840s. And this is after Irving's writing made Christmas popular in America. Before that, though, in 1823, a man named Clement Moore, knowing the tradition very well practiced by many Americans where they celebrated St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, wrote a poem before his children about a visitation from St. Nicholas called The Night Before Christmas. So The Night Before Christmas is actually older than Dickens' story and is just over 200 years old, telling the story of the visitation from St. Nicholas and the stockings being hung and all of these things, showing that even in America at this time, the practice of celebrating Christmas, getting gifts, stocking stuffers, and all of this were already quite common and well established, and were now already being written about. And if you know anything about history, you know that if something is being written about, that is because it is already happening in the culture already. So the practice of celebrating Santa Claus, the practice of stuffing stockings, things like this, the practice of giving gifts and using Santa Claus as a way to make children behave well was already really popular. I can't mention anything else about the traditions of Santa Claus, which I'm going to get into a little bit more, and his modern form without talking about Krampus. Krampus is a German alternative to Santa Claus, who is a holiday monster who was basically used to threaten children to behave well. And if they didn't behave well, Krampus would punish them and basically abduct and kill them. And that was a common tradition in Germany going back centuries before the actual celebration of Santa Claus. So, and I believe, if I'm correct, that Krampus is actually pagan and mythical as well, very much like their celebrations of Odin by these people like the Alemanni and the Teutoni and the Lombardi and these different Germanic tribes who chafed under the Roman Empire and basically migrated from place to place trying to survive and not starve and freeze to death every winter. So Krampus has been used through the centuries as a way, and it become more popular in recent years with movies and pop culture references, as a way to keep children behaving without incentive. This is more of a stick than the carrot, where Santa Claus promises to bring you gifts if you behave. Krampus promises to bring you death and destruction if you don't behave. Um, so, um, but basically, uh, what else was happening? So, back to what I just said. So I talked about Krampus. I talked about "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." That became a very popular uh, holiday poem talking about Saint Nicholas. Sugar plums danced in their head. All of these things that were really, really cool, and really, really enjoyable about Christmas. All of these traditions were obviously becoming more and more common. Now we need to talk about Santa Claus himself and how we get from this ancient Christian figure who used to throw gifts into stockings in open windows, to the modern red guy in the red suit with the long beard and the hat and the pack of toys. Well, interestingly enough, and a lot of people believe that Coca-Cola is actually the one that invented the modern Santa Claus in 1931, thanks to the drawings and illustrations of Hayden Sundblom, who for a promotional campaign drew Santa Claus with the red suit, the pack of toys, and the hat. And that Coca-Cola gave us the modern Santa Claus. And I believe that and have said that before until recently, because it's actually not true. Santa Claus, once again, taken from the Germans, just like the Christmas tree. Again, you have these emergence of these popular customs from Germany because you have a large number of German immigrants who have moved to the United States. So American Christmas cannot emerge into its modern consumer form that we all know and a lot of us really love, unless you have this large immigrant population bringing their customs and traditions with them. And one of the biggest contributors were the Germans. So the German immigrants dominate the first half of the 19th century when it comes to immigration. The vast majority, the disproportionate amount of immigrants who came to the United States between the years 1820 and 1860 were German. The second largest group were Irish. And the Germans brought with them their tradition of Santa Claus, Sinterklaas, Papa Noel. All of these terms were very familiar to the German immigrants who came to the United States. And one German immigrant by the name of Thomas Nast wrote for the Harper's Weekly Gazette, which was one of the biggest writing publications and political cartoons and comics published in America. And Thomas Nast was decided to, for the holiday edition of the Harper's Weekly Gazette, to make a version of Santa Claus, of what the English also called Father Christmas. By the way, the English tradition of Father Christmas is a little bit different than Santa Claus in the sense that he is actually the personification of Christmas, and he uses his sled to travel around, and that is where we get the sled and the reindeer from. Interestingly enough, that also comes once again from the ancient Germanic tribes and their fear of Odin flying around on a sleigh, assessing them. And because Odin would fly around on a sleigh, you get the notion from Santa Claus. But you also have Father Christmas, who would pull a sled with reindeer on it, and that is the English personification of Christmas. He's actually the spirit of Christmas. Um, yes. What else was I going to say? This German immigrant Thomas Nast, in order to give everybody a better understanding of how of German culture, shared his German culture with Santa Claus. And if you look at the images that he came up with in 1863, once again, this is a very important year. This is the year Thanksgiving became a national holiday. It's in the middle of a civil war. Things are very tense and divided in America. You need something to give you hope, inspiration, and joy. So you have Lincoln pardoning the first Thanksgiving turkey named Jack just the month before, and now you have the Harper's Weekly Gazette publishing this image of a man in a red suit carrying a pack of toys with him. He doesn't really have a hat, but he does have a wreath around his head, interestingly enough, which, of course, the wreaths go back to the ancient Greeks and Romans and are symbols of power and victory, but they are also symbols of Christmas. The Christmas wreath also was made popular by the German Lutherans because it is also an evergreen, just like the Christmas tree, and it goes in a circle. It is a never ending circle to represent the never ending love of God. That is how the German Lutherans would have understood it. So it's not a beanie, actually. I know I haven't interacted with the chat a lot. There's been some interesting stuff in there. It is my Grinchmas hat. Of course, the Grinch, talk about a popular Christmas tradition. Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel, I think it was published in the early 60s, a commentary on American consumerism. But also, you have a Grinch, much like Ebenezer Scrooge, a figure of bitterness and anger who, through heartwarming activity and the joy of Christmas, is able to transform his entire personality and become a better person because people love a redemption arc and narrative during Christmas for some reason. So, um, what else was I going to say? So you have the emergence of um, Father Christmas. He's the personification of Christmas. Oh, yes, Thomas Nast. So Thomas Nast has this image of Santa Claus, and that is a modern Christmas image with a wreath instead of really a hat. But if you look back, there are images from 1860s of Santa Claus. We know him. Now, he's not going to look exactly like we know and think of Santa Claus, but department stores that emerge. So you have in England, the rise of the Industrial Revolution creates a large amount of wage gaps, and you have the rich making a lot of money and the poor really struggling, and people working very dirty jobs such as mining. And this is talked about in the Christmas Carol. There's a lot of cultural commentary in the Christmas Carol, a lot of social commentary, and a lot of messaging about how do we treat the poor, how do we treat those in society who are struggling. And believe it or not, there are very similar cultural trends in America, and there's social commentary used with Santa Claus. The emergence of a middle class in the later parts of the Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century leads to people, particularly women, shopping more and more, and people embracing holidays and weekends, and the emergence of large department stores in the late 19th century in large cities like New York and Chicago are places where people, particularly women, can go and shop, especially around the holiday season, for gifts. And a great way to advertise for toys is to use the greatest toy giver of all time, Santa Claus. So there are images of department stores actually advertising and selling toys in the early 1900s with Santa Claus on them. And there you have a fuller version of the red suit, hat and coat with the long beard and a pack of toys. And that was used as a marketing tactic by these department stores in the emergence of a modern consumer culture in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century, where you have these society ladies and middle class people who are going into these department stores and shopping, excuse me, for gifts during the holiday season. So, um, basically, the point I'm trying to make is the Santa Claus that we get well before Coke was already a consumer image being used by people, by department stores and things like this to really embrace the holiday season. And of course, Macy's kind of gets the trademark on him. And this is where we get the story of a famous movie, Miracle on 34th Street, which is one of my favorite Christmas movies, in which the real Santa shows up. Basically, it's a really good one. But basically, Santa shows up just to tell the consumerist to stop being consumerist and to embrace Christmas for what it really is. Um, so those are some things about Christmas in that at that time and in that way. Um, so you have Santa Claus. Now we finally get, interestingly enough, Norman Rockwell even gave his take on Santa Claus in 1925 in his December edition of the Saturday Evening Post. So, anyways, um, but Santa Claus, the Saturday Evening Post by Norman Rockwell in 1925, actually, if you look at it, gives his depiction of Santa Claus, and it's worth looking at because because we all know and love Norman Rockwell and his incredible paintings. And once again, just like Washington Irving's stories about the rich hanging out with the poor and forgiving debts and throwing parties for the poor in the 1820s, just like Dickens' Christmas Carol, just like all of these things, these are all part of an emergence of a culture around Christmas that really embraces the celebration of joy and holiday cheer. And in America, it is once again the contributions of different immigrants from different groups, be they Dutch or German or English, who are going to lead to the creation and celebration of things like the Christmas tree, Christmas wreaths, Santa Claus, and so on. And of course, in 1931, Hayden Sundblom, working for Coca-Cola, gives his take on this is at the beginning of the Great Depression. There's a fear of economic worry. So you obviously need a very strong and good marketing campaign. That's the historical context. And so Hayden Sundblom, working for Coke, creates this very jolly, red-cheeked man with his red suit and beard, and that is the modern form of Santa Claus that we know and love to this day, and has kind of stuck around for the last almost century now in American and Western culture. Um, so, anyways, this has been a lot of fun, but I basically wanted to give you a rundown of a bunch of different Christmas traditions and how and why they are celebrated, and basically going from the ancient world and how people centuries before the birth of Jesus, which Christmas is supposed to be about, were celebrating Christmas as a time of hope and joy. It was a time of holiday cheer for people who had made it through a difficult year and were now being able to drink some wine and eat the fattened calves in Germany and hopefully being able to survive. It was a time for people to gather around a fire and get warm during the cold winter months in Scandinavia when they celebrated their Yule logs and enjoyed their Christmas season. It was a time for people in England to read and enjoy the Christmas Carol as a way of giving hope to the world and joy and all of those great stuff and all of that great stuff. Um, but it was a time for merriment and enjoyment. It was a time for people of all backgrounds to come together and work together to be good to one another and to survive and to thrive and to find reasons to smile. It was a time for the rich to serve the poor. It was a time for the poor to have opportunities. And so, really, isn't that what Christmas is all about at the end of the day? Whatever way you celebrate it, however you celebrate it, and even if you don't celebrate it, the historical and cultural significance of Christmas cannot be understated. And the messaging and themes of Christmas come from those ancient I uh, come from those ancient notions all the way back of surviving and thriving and enjoying your lives together. And it's no different whether you're reading the Christmas Carol, whether you're waiting patiently for Saint Nick while visions of sugar plums dance in your head, or whether you're surviving the frozen tundras of Scandinavia and hoping that the Yule log lasts longer this year than it did the year before, or if you're enjoying Saturnalia and what he brought you through the agriculture. The ancient Romans knew how to party and enjoy Christmas, just like the medieval people who would celebrate for days on end the birth of their Lord and Savior. And so this isn't. So yes, in a way, Alex, Christmas doesn't have Christian roots, and yet it does. And Christmas is about Santa Claus, and Christmas is not about Santa Claus. There are so many different stories and traditions and practices that go back to different parts of the world and to different parts of the Western world that you must understand. A lot of people uh, would do well to understand that Christmas has become a domineering Western holiday, not something as commonly celebrated in the Eastern world or in Africa, because there are all sorts of celebrations there. Obviously, Hanukkah is celebrated around this time, and there are celebrations in Hinduism and other festivals and other religions that do not have anything to do with Christmas. And that is why the moniker Happy Holidays has become more popular in recent years as America once again goes through a period, thanks to that large amount of immigration, which helped create those Christmas traditions at the first time, of diversification in which people from all different parts of the world who celebrate and don't celebrate Christmas come together to hopefully embrace those same feelings of joy and lightness, whether it's the winter season or any of the other three seasons. And this is common not just in America, but throughout the entire world. So, um, and yes, A happy Christmas to you from India. Great to see you. I'm so glad everybody has joined us, and I really hope you learned something and enjoyed learning about Christmas. We wish you an extremely Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. By the way, the history of that song's not the most pleasant one because it's about a bunch of people basically bullying people into giving them food because they're starving to death. I mean, we won't leave until we get some. We won't leave until we get some. So bring us some now. It's a very forceful and abrasive song if you actually listen to the lyrics and know the story. It's about poor English people begging for food in the countryside. But yes, I hope everybody has a wonderful Christmas and a terrific holiday season. And for those of you celebrating Hanukkah, I will not see you again on the channel until the first couple of days of Hanukkah. Check out my videos tomorrow in which I talk about the history of Christmas and the history of Hanukkah, two of the most important holidays celebrated at the exact same time during the year, which is really, really cool. But if you like what you heard about, if you learned something, even if you don't celebrate Christmas, if you enjoyed what you learned about in today's lecture, please like and subscribe, join the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, become a Friendly Neighborhood historian, show some love to my wonderful moderator, Simon, who did a great job holding down the chat as he always does. And Simon, a very, very Merry Christmas to you. I know that you celebrate it and you really, really enjoy it. Um, and I wish everyone a Merry Christmas. And if I don't see you on the live stream, a Happy New Year. But hopefully you will join us before the new year when we will be doing live streams next Friday, Saturday. My Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where Alex, if you want to talk more about religion, you have more questions about the historic origins of different religious symbols and figures, join me then, and I will be happy to answer your questions then, because that's our Ask Me Anything. And then, of course, next Sunday we'll be back with a live stream lecture, which I'm not sure what we're going to do yet for our topic, but I'm sure it'll be really enjoyable. But again, thank you all for joining. Thank you all for enjoying our discussion and everything. Like and subscribe, and a Merry Christmas to you all. And as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. Enjoy the holidays, Spartacus. It's great to see you. Thank you so much. And Simon, I'm going to sign off if that's okay with you. But I hope you have a really great holiday. A Merry Christmas to you as well, Joey. I'm always happy to see you here. But Simon, a special Merry Christmas to you. And I hope everybody's holiday wishes and dreams come true. See you guys very soon again. Bye bye now.